Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Thank you all. And yes, it would be amazing if you can just squeeze in as tight as possible, yeah. And it is such a privilege to share. And let me give the sucking sweet to Mary Ann before I spit it on somebody. Thank you. And I come here with the assumption that you're here at a meeting like this because you are ready to go beyond just an inspirational message, which is always fun. It's great, but this evening I think the Lord's just going to open up areas of thought and ideas and maybe stuff you haven't heard before. Maybe it's stuff that you have thought and kind of touched, but you were too scared to articulate it or too nervous to say it. And I'm so glad that God is not nervous of our questions. He's not nervous of our doubts. He's not nervous of us reading widely and considering this truth from every possible way. And this evening, it might take me a while to get to the Bible because I'm going to take a detour through neurology and maybe a bit of psychology and a few other avenues of science and of knowledge that has considered what is man, what makes you, you. And by the way, it's one of God's favorite topics, is you. I know we often get together and I know with sincerity we say it's not about us, it's all about Him. And that's for us who have fallen in love with God, it's very true. But I kind of feel from God's point of view, He sometimes says, oh, please just stop it. For me, it's all about you. Do you know that for God, it's all about you? This is why the Word becomes flesh. He commits Himself to your humanity and to your existence. And He is so intrigued with you. And He designed you in a way that He will forever be intrigued with who you are. No wonder David says, what is man? That your mind is full of us. Hey, if you've got bored of yourself, it's because you're not seeing what God sees. What He sees in you excites Him. And we're going to delve a little bit into that and look at who are you. Now that question by itself assumes that you are self-conscious. But what is the self that you are conscious of? Is that self all there is to you? Our bodies have been designed in such a way that you can withstand a certain amount of pain and then you lose consciousness. You can withstand a certain amount of stress and anxiety and you will pass out. It's a mechanism to protect you where you cannot be overloaded with too much. And in the same way, self-consciousness is a deliberate limitation placed upon you. Because if you had to know and see everything that you really are, you'd be overwhelmed. And so the real you is more than the self you've been aware of. I am more than myself. And we're going to delve into what that self is because, we kind of develop ideas and terminology and we speak about being your true self, but what is that self? Is it some static design, and we normally resort to metaphysical language, to some kind of spiritual language when we kind of run out of logical things to say, and we just speak about the spirit self. But what is that spirit self? Is it just energy that kind of fills the same body in which I am? What are we? And what I want to attempt to try and open up tonight is that what makes you you is not some static, defined entity, but the self is a very dynamic construct that is continually in a state of flux, and it's good. And you're going to see that that's good. And naturally, we try and draw away from it because we are so invested in the Western philosophy that says you are an autonomous individual self. And we love to live in that illusion because it gives us a sense of control and of a sense of control, because I don't need anyone else to be myself. But the reflective being is a being that cannot be itself by itself. It needs a reference beyond itself to reflect. And the very way in which God's designed you is as a being that only finds its wholeness as it intermingles with the otherness of God. So when you said nursery rhyme, I remembered the poem. I thought we'll start off with that. I am a wind that cannot be confined, a symbol of a presence, a breeze, a movement undefined. How do I of myself get hold unless I divide? One to be held and one to hold, one to be found and one to hide. But then I'm not wholly known or held. For the I that is known knows naught, and the I that knows is a storm unknown. I am you, this tempest pretends, concealing its thunder in knowledge, in sense, disguising its gales in language as it defines and confines the I that is known. It remains savage. Never itself does it bow to these rules or become subject to its own tools, assuring us that all is calm and all is real, yet its own substance it does not reveal. Can the knower ever be known? And can the I that is known awake and see the I that knows? If possible, I can be whole, fully known. I'm beginning to see how blind I've been. I am much more than the self I've seen. The undefined can no longer hide. Reveal yourself. Thunder, whisper, abide, so that I may know the one who knows, and together we'll be, I am, without boundary. So there's a part of you that thinks it knows you. And that part of you that pretends to know who you are remains unknown. And it is that you that God wants to come and introduce you to, because it is a you that has been formed in unconscious processes. and therefore it remains unconscious of its own beginning and of its own true nature. Where shall I begin? We're going to speak about the reflective nature of man. And I'm going to quickly read a little piece by a French psychologist and believer who wrote a little piece just contemplating what is it that draws humans together and repels them. Why is it that we have an interest in one another? Why would children be interested in their parents? What is this force that uniquely makes us human? And no one, to my knowledge, this is from his book, Jean-Michel Augelian, and I think this book is called The Puppet of Desire. No one, to my knowledge, has ever thought of naming the force that draws the child into reproducing what an adult says or does. This force of attraction, interest, and attention, so much of it taken for granted, so much of it a part of the fabric of humanity. A young child has no power to resist that attraction. To feel such attraction is the child's very nature to the degree that he or she is normal. A child lacking this capacity would be deprived of something basic to his humanity. He would become isolated, autistic. The natural force of cohesion, which alone grants access to the social, to language, to culture, and indeed to humanness itself, is simultaneously mysterious and obvious, hidden in and of itself, but dazzling in its effect. Like gravity and the attraction of corporeal masses in Newtonian space, if gravity did not exist, life on Earth would be impossible. Without it, there would be chaos. Similarly, if the remarkable force that attracts human beings to one another, that unites them, that enables children to model themselves on adults, that makes possible their full ontogenesis, and as I said, their acquisition of language. If this force did not exist, there would be no mankind. So this is just a little part of the new book that's going out that I want to read here. I will refer to this force that makes us uniquely human, this capacity for relationship, as mimesis. It comes from, the Greek word mimetis, which basically, it's what we find in Ephesians 5, verse 1. Imitate your father, or mimic your father. We are made with the capacity to reflect, to mimic, to imitate. And so this process of reflection is what I will refer to as we speak further as mimesis. Mimesis is the process by which we perceive and often unconsciously imitate the intentions or desires of others. It is already present at the very moment in which the self begins to form as the force that makes consciousness possible. So let's start from a neurological point of view. And we're going to draw it all together maybe by the second session into the scriptures. But what neurology is concerned, a discovery was made quite by accident in which they were testing a group of monkeys to see what neurons would fire when the monkeys reached for a peanut and peeled it and ate it. And during this experiment, one of the researchers just walked past one of the bowls, reached out to the peanuts, and all the instruments went crazy. And they thought it's a mistake, and they redid this experiment. And what they discovered is that almost the exact same neurons fire when the monkeys observe an action as when they perform the action. This brought them to the discovery, and they termed it mirror neurons because it was mirroring the action of another. And they eventually did much more sophisticated experiments with humans because the implications of this is huge. And what they found in humans is something much more complex than monkey see, monkey do. They found out that humans has the capacity to reflect the intentions and desires of others. Now let me show you how that works. And this capacity doesn't develop. You're just born with it. So newborn children, half an hour out of the womb, Maltzoff and Moore are the people who studied this. You can read further about it in a book called Mimesis and Science. They would take newborn children and do certain facial expressions like pouting the mouth, etc. And the children would imitate. How does a baby who has never even seen himself in a mirror know that that funny face over there, that protruding mouth equals this mouth here, and imitate? What is it about our humanity that so connects us to one another and so reflect within us? And so they continue to do many of these experiments. One of the experiments they've done is with a one year, I think it's between 1 and 1.5 year old, they would show a child, a person trying to disassemble a toy and fail at the attempt of disassembling it. Then they would leave the toy with the child, and the child would immediately begin to attempt to reach the same goal, even avoiding the failed attempt. Somehow, unconsciously, this 1-year-old child understood the intention or the desire of another person. And self begins to form when we recognize another that is like us. It is you need both otherness and likeness for this reflection, this awareness, this consciousness to begin to form. And this goes way beyond, as I said, monkey see, monkey do. This is another person, unconsciously untrained, uneducated child, reading the mind of another. And it just happens naturally, unconsciously. Now, the experiments, continued, and one of the things that they found that is being transferred in this mimetic process more unconsciously than anything else is the transfer of desires. Oh yes, by the way, they would try and redo that same experiment of disassembling a toy, but they would use a robot. And the children would have no interest in that toy. Why not? Because there was no intention to mirror. There was no likeness, no desire that they could reflect. They would only do it with humans. And so further experimentation that they did is they would take these 1.5-year-old kids. It's obviously done in groups because all the parameters for experimentation needs to get your averages, etc. And they would take children sitting across from an adult. The adult will get the attention of the child and then look at another object. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, the child will follow the gaze of the adult. Then they ask the adults to do the same again, but this time, before they looked away, close your eyes and then look And in the overwhelming majority of cases, the children would not imitate, because there is something about your gaze that gives value to what you are looking at and communicates what is desirable. This is why human eyes with their big white spaces makes it so easy for us to see where we are looking and where adults are looking. And this is the first place in which children become aware of what is desirable. A little baby is born in a kind of paradise where I only have eyes for mom and mom only has eyes for me. And everything I need is found in this tree of life. And very soon the child starts realizing that mom also looks other places. And the child begins to follow the gaze, and desires are being communicated. And again, neurologists tells us that they speak of 3 different kinds of selfhood. The first is what they call primordial self, and that is the self of feeling. You see, you have not reasoned yourself into consciousness. Can you remember your earliest memory? What is the first thing that you remember where you became aware of who you are? Some people can, some people can't. It's a bit vague, but for some people it's very vivid. There was a moment, their earliest memory, where they suddenly remember seeing their brother across the table or something like that. But the fact is, the primordial self is a self of feeling. A young child doesn't become self-conscious because of complex philosophies. A young child becomes self-conscious because I feel hungry. I want mom. I feel I need something. And so the most fundamental, the most basic self is a self of feeling. Only later, after that, does it become the self of action. Well, if you're hungry, do whatever it takes to get food. And then the third self that psychologist speaks of is the autobiographical self. This is the self that we form as we continue to store up images of things that we've experienced and things that we've witnessed. And we store up these images and we build up a memory bank, and we convince ourselves that there is something that has not changed throughout all of those memories, and that something that hasn't changed is me. That I am the one who experienced all of these things. Now, it's interesting how they describe how self begins to form. If you can imagine, and you might have often seen this, children would run to the same toy and they would say, I saw it first. It's like my sight gives me ownership. It is my desire. It is my sight. It is my ownership. And you can imagine a room full of toys, and you put a 3-year-old in this room, not paying particular attention to any one toy, and then bring another 3-year-old into the room. The very first thing the second child will notice is the first child. And the next thing the child will notice is the toy closest to the first child. And he will head over to that toy. And when he reaches for it, the first child will realize that this is the toy he's been wanting all his life. And war breaks out. And that's kind of a short summary of human history, where we don't know what we want, and we look at one another to tell us what is it we desire. And we run after what we think somebody else wants, and enter into rivalry and conflict. But you see, desire did not originate within that child. We are wired in a way that desires are suggested to us through the gaze, the proximity, and the actions of others tells us what is desirable. But there comes a moment where the child, being bombarded with desires, asks, where does this desire come from? And this happens, unconsciously. And the conclusion is, I am the origin of my desires. I desire that toy. And so the very formation of a consciousness of self takes place in a kind of deception. Because we do not know that desires were suggested to us. And so we claim to be the originators of our own desires. And that very act in which we say that we own our own desires, we own this, is the beginning of a self that finds its existence in its claim to possess stuff. And I would call this the little self. It's a self that needs to be formed in all of us, but it's a self that becomes very limiting in years to come. Because if you just find yourself in what you own, it's going to become very frustrating, very small, very limiting, very soon. And so there's this, there was this shocking moment. The shocking moment happened for me maybe the beginning of this year, an epiphany, because we have continued to speak and teach and write books and things concerning your true self for many years, and to communicate who are you, what are you, has been such a focus of what we've done. And as I went through a period of 3-4 months in which I gave intensive time to studying from all kinds of perspectives and writing, the one day I just realized when I started seeing this, that if I am not the originator of my desires, but rather my desires forms me. It was a moment in which I started realizing who I am more than ever before. So let me phrase this differently. If I ask you, who are you? For you to get closer to a true answer, we've got to change the question and ask, what do you desire? That is going to bring you much closer to a discovery of who you are than asking the question, who am I? And the very next thing after you've asked the question, what do I desire? You need to ask the next question. Where does this desire come from? So I'm not speaking about food, water, the basic needs that we need to survive. Everyone has basic animal instincts to say, I want to survive. I want to eat and drink. But when those basic needs to survive are fulfilled, what is it that you desire? Number one. Number two, where does that desire come from? So 2 points I want to quickly summarize of what we've said so far. Number one, You are a mimetic being. And we'll see this in Scripture in our second session. You are a being that's designed to reflect. Number 2, desire is mimetic. In other words, desire doesn't just originate and pop up and is created in yourself. Desire is continually suggested to you. From the earliest moments of consciousness, you are wired to follow the eye movements, the suggestions, the intentions, the desires of everyone around you. And in that process, somehow you filter out, what do I desire? And you claim to be the originator of your own desires. But the truth is, you were formed through desire. You did not originate desire. And so this is good news, because if we discover what desire formed us, we discover the one who desired us and knew us, and again begin to reflect him, we enter into a place of discovery what we really are, like never before. I want to, in this first session, first give you another just kind of concept of mimesis, of this mimetic process, so that you know, the word imitate often carries negative connotations to it, because, you know, who wants to be an imitation? We want to be authentic. We want to be original. And I can remember my granddad being an artist. From a very young age, I was taught to despise imitation art. You know, I don't want prints, I want the original. There's something about the artist that was involved in the paint and that still contains some of that originality in the painting. And so imitation had a negative implication for me from an early age. And as I started studying art, I read how Leonardo da Vinci openly spoke against imitation. And I thought, yes, I agree. I don't want to be an imitator. I want to be original. And very soon in my study of art, I found the kind of art that I really loved and enjoyed. And it was the impressionistic art, where there's a lot of movement, a lot of color, how they try to capture the movement of the wind, the colors, the vibrancy, and involve the observer in completing the picture in their own imagination. I love that kind of art. And so as I, with great intention, studied it, I started practicing my technique, and through repetition, eventually I did a piece of artwork that I felt, yeah, I'm satisfied with what I've done. I've been true to my artistic self. I felt so satisfied and proud, not knowing that everything I produced was suggested to me through the careful observation, study. Repetition is just another word of saying imitation. The repetition, practice, etc., that I've applied to eventually produce this piece of art. Leonardo da Vinci might not have known that the fact that he could dress himself and speak was because he was able to imitate. I might not even have realized that my desire to imitate no one was an imitation of Leonardo da Vinci's desire to imitate no one. And so this process of imitation is unconscious, because the self would probably not be able to form if we knew how reflective we are. And so it's almost in this place of ignorance where we claim things as originating in ourselves that the self has an opportunity to form. Now, I understand that, if I had to copy Monet's water lilies exactly, you could tell me, that's not really art, you've just imitated that one person. So I understand we don't just want to imitate one artist, but it's the fact that I could learn from Monet, learn from Picasso, learn from Van Gogh, learn from all kinds of other things, be influenced by my environment, that creativity is not the absence of imitation. It's the unique combination of different imitations that makes you truly creative. So it's the fact that we are able to reflect different parts of different people and different situations and different environments, and there's nothing wrong with that. You are made as a reflective being. Genius is not finding some source within you that needs no model. No, we are made to model. We are made to reflect. It's part of our humanity. Now, how does all of this tie into the beautiful gospel? You see, if you understand what you really are, your true nature, when you start understanding what salvation, what atonement is as well, and you start seeing the work of Christ in its context, because we can start seeing what went wrong in humanity as we lost sight of the God who desired us, and adoration turned to accusation, and trust turned to suspicion, and we misinterpreted who God is. And when we misinterpret who God is, we start reflecting the God of our confusion. And this is what we have throughout the Old Testament, a God in conversation with humanity, wanting to reveal himself. But because this God is not a model in any sense that can be observed, we often mix God's self-revelation with projections of our own fear and of our own anxiety and of our own confusion, combine it together to produce a multiple personality God at best, or a monster in many cases. And so Jesus comes as the true light, as the authentic image, a model that we can see. One that can come and show us again what and who God is. So let's go to Genesis. And what I'll do is I'll take another 10 minutes or so. Then we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for the finale on our reflective nature. So we are reflective beings. And so here in Genesis 1, a story is being told, and we can see that the ancient intuitions is exactly this, that there's something reflective about humanity. And the ultimate goal for man is to reflect the God who imagined us, the God who desired us. And so the Genesis story, was the most irreligious text of its day. And to understand that, you actually need to understand what other literary documents and other stories were popular in the days in which Genesis was written. And when you understand that, you start seeing that Genesis actually came to set people free from religious superstitions. So in a world in which people lived in anxiety, in fear, because however it developed, they came to a place where they lived in a very harsh environment. If it wasn't natural disaster, it was sickness. If it wasn't sickness, it was the neighboring tribe that came and sowed death and destruction on the community. So death was a in-your-face reality continually. There's probably still places similar to that today where, just imagine living in a town. You are so privileged, so fortunate to have been born where you've been born. But there's people who are living in places where, a brutal enemy could strike you any moment. And if disease comes, there's no hospital for hundreds of miles. And if natural disaster comes, by the time the rest of the world has woken up to it, most of your family is gone. So there's still places like that today. Now, that is the environment in which the original myths were written. Now, myths are the first attempts of humans to place their thinking into stories. It's the first attempt to make sense of the overwhelming events and experiences, and we are wired in such a way that we somehow try to make sense of what is happening to us. And so in the midst of overwhelming disaster, suffering, and evil, man begins to put their thoughts in a very flamboyant, a very very different. The style of myths is very exaggerated. But man, and the myths are thousands of years old, thousands of years before Christ. But basically, what it boils down to is man came to the place where, because of our environment, we believed that there were many gods who could care less about you. They weren't particularly good or evil, particularly moral or not. All we know is that when the wind god and the storm god and the earth god had a fight, there was disaster, and many of us died as just collateral damage to the squabbles between the gods. And so to try and find a way to cheat even the gods, and the gods, the stories we told about them is they began in this primordial waters, the salt water and the fresh water that commingled, that gave birth to the other gods. And it wasn't even those original gods that created the world. It was a demigod much further down that created this. And so mankind continually tried to get back to that original substance to which even the gods were subject. That's why there were many stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a big story of man's pursuit to find the tree of life. Because if we can just find this tree with which we can even cheat the gods, then we can maybe somehow protect ourselves from their stupid squabbles and fights. But can you see that in this context in which man lives in a continual anxiety of gods who does not care for us, the Genesis account is radical, because it comes to say that there is one God without competition, one God who's got no rivalry with anyone, and what he makes is good. The water is good, the earth is good, the plants are good, Animals are good, and you are very good. Now, in the context of living in this continual anxiety, the understanding that there is one God who is only good is a tremendous attack on religious superstitions. I mean, the religious made their money by selling incantations to protect you from evil. It often happens today as well. Hey, exorcisms, half price. And if you don't pay, you'll get repossessed. Now, there's, they existed on the superstitions and fears of people. And so this Genesis account that comes to say all things that God made is good, and you are very good, that brought a tremendous sense of relief. And what was interesting, the seventh day, in most of the pagan ancient rituals and religions, was the most evil day. That's the day on which you go and purchase twice the amount of incantations you would normally get, because you've got to work. But the Genesis account says, hey, on day 7, you just chill. You just enjoy the beauty of what God has made. You just enter this place of rest and knowledge that you have never been an afterthought of God, of the God squabble. You are the very reason God created. And the way in which this God creates, you see, the way in which the other gods created is they always created through violence. So Tiamat in Enuma Elish just means when on high or in the beginning. It is the etymological exact equivalent to Genesis 1. In the beginning, when God began creating. And so when in those myths, the way in which the gods create is through violence. Violence is creative. Violence produces new options. So when Marduk has a fight with Tiamat, he sends an evil wind in, and Tiamat is the god of chaos, the waters of chaos, and he bursts her body apart, and he takes the top part and he makes the heavens, and the bottom part and he makes the earth. And he gives the gods all their tasks, but after a while the gods become quite bored with their tasks, so they complain to Marduk and say, please make us some servants, we're just bored at this menial tasks, and so that's why you are here. He takes the blood from Kingu, one of the generals that was defeated, and out of the blood of violence humanity is formed. And so the message is very clear in these pictures. Violence is your nature. You've been born from violence. You've been birthed from violence. You are made to serve. And if you step out of order, we know how to deal with disorder. With an iron fist, we bring order back to disorder through violence. The Genesis writer starts, and when he speaks the first sentence, anybody that was familiar with Enuma Elish, which is most of the people where Israel found themselves in the Babylonian exile between 586 and 539, that's where Israel were slaves, and that is where Enuma Elish was the text that was written, and that is when the Genesis text is brought into being. So when the writer of Genesis says, when God began creating, most of their audience would have heard the equivalent of Enuma Elish. There was chaos, and there was waters. The waters of chaos covered the earth. Hey, we know this story. This is familiar. And then, how does God bring order to chaos? He says, and there was darkness on the face. We've translated it on the face of the deep. The Hebrew says on the face of Tiamat. So the original hearers would still say, is this a same story than what we've heard before? He said, but then the difference comes. So the first few sentences, everybody would think, oh, this is just another version of Mimesis. There's the beginning, there's chaos, there's Tiamat. And what does God do? He sends his wind. Just like Marduk sent his wind into the face of Tiamat and blew a body apart. But this God brings order to chaos not through violence, but through a message. He speaks a word. And the way in which he creates is by creating greater and greater differentiation. Because remember, the self is formed in a place where there's both likeness and otherness. You need both likeness and otherness. And so God begins to create differentiation and greater otherness. The first 3 days he creates the 3 spaces. You know, day 1 he separates light from darkness. Day 2 he separates the waters above, the waters below, what is above from what is below. Day 3 he separates the dry land from the water. Then on day 4, 5, and 6 he fills the spaces that was created on day 1, 2, and 3. On day 4 he puts the sun to rule by day and the moon and the stars to rule by day. Day 5 he creates the birds and the fish. And it's so beautiful how God creates. He invites his creation to participate with him in the creative act. God doesn't just make a lot of fish in heaven and throws them into the sea. God speaks to the substance from which he wants to make this new creature called fish. And he speaks to the sea and he says, sea, you bring forth fish. And the sea brought forth. When God wants to make plants, animals, he doesn't just make them in heaven, throw them on earth. No, he speaks to the substance from which plants and animals are made, and he speaks to the earth, and he says, earth, bring forth plants, animals, and the earth brought forth. God allows his creatures to participate in the creative act. And so when he wants to make you, when he wants to make man, he speaks to the substance from which man is made, and he speaks to himself, and he says, let us make man, bring forth man. Our image, our likeness. Now here you have likeness and otherness. You've got God, whose whole purpose of creating was to find image bearers. God whose whole motivation was not a sense of lack, was not a sense of inferiority. We can go to other scriptures, but we'll find it over and over again. But God wasn't just bored looking for entertainment. God wasn't just needy or had suffered from a sense of inferiority where he thought, if I could just make 6 billion people to tell me how amazing I am, I'll feel better about myself. No, it's no sense of lack that motivated God to create. It is the overflow of this dynamic relationship of Father, Son, and Spirit. This place in which the creative God continually imagines new ways of being himself. That he imagines what would it be like to invest myself into a physical form? What kind of creature can I bring into existence through which this world can experience me and through which I can experience this world? And so you see, God, the Creator, is never a creator just in the sense of He did it once a long time ago. He created this world, wound it up, put it out there, and now He's observing it from a distance. No, this God is the God who continually sustains all creation in existence. He's distinct from His creation, but He is never separate from it. You know, when we started peering into the reality of what is reality, we found the atom. We found this little spinning thing, neutrons and protons, but you know that an atom is 99% nothing and a very small percentage something. If I took a baseball and I put a string on it and I swing it around me very quickly, you couldn't approach me from any side, but it's just because the little bit of something moves so quickly that it feels as if there's something, but there's much more nothing than something. And when they continue to peer even deeper, what is this neutrons? And they found stuff called quarks, and quarks pop in and out of existence, and no one knows where they go. And the more they try and find something, the more deeper we peer, the more we find nothing. And so when they are asked what is the best way with which to describe the energy that sustains all of existence, you might have heard of string theory, which basically says sound energy is the most accurate way with which to describe the nature of reality. Every element is just a different frequency of vibration. And the different frequency will produce different elements. And this means that all of creation is just one big symphony. I cannot but think of Hebrews 1 verse 3 that says He sustains all of creation through the Word. It is still the voice of God that vibrates in every atom, in every element, that sustains this world in existence. Every moment is an act of creation. Our Creator is never absent, because if something exists, it's because God is present. So this God is close. This God is the one who we can sense His steadfastness in the mountains. We can sense Him stirring as we see a breeze blow over these beautiful grass fields. We can sense Him waking up in the liveliness of animals. But in man, God becomes conscious, even of Himself. So what He imagined when He imagined you was not some experiment, some way of just entertaining Himself. But He imagined you as the crown of His creation, meaning that you are His favorite form of existence. And so here's man created in the image and the likeness of God. There's likeness and there's otherness. But what is the desire that will animate man? Because you see, psychologically, the only movement is desire. That is what animates. That is what gives life. Just being the image and likeness of God doesn't mean you're alive yet. God designs a being that is capable of reflecting Him. But what is the desire that's going to start this movement, that's going to breathe life into our existence? And we read that in Genesis 1:28, where God blessed man, or the Hebrew word barak. It means an act of adoration. So the very first thing that man experiences is, according to this Genesis account, is the adoration of God. Man experiences the desire that brought you into existence. You exist because God desired you. And you are truly yourself when you allow that desire to form you. Where you say, you see, when you encounter once again this authentic desire that imagined you and brought you forth, what happens in this encounter is every other desire that you have allowed to form you dissolves. And you are undone. This is maybe why Jesus said, unless you're willing to lose yourself, to die to that little tiny self that finds its existence in what it claims to be its own. That little self that thinks, I am who I am because this is what I believe, this is what I desire, this is what I own. When you allow that little I, that little self, to just dissolve, and you discover a much bigger I, an I that is not confined to self, but the I who is intermingled with I am. And you discover this other who desired you, who imagined you, who loved you before you had any opportunity to disappoint him or to impress him. What he knew about you so awakened his desire that here you are. When you allow that desire to start to form you, let's take a break for 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and look at Genesis 2 and 3 and look at what happens when desire becomes twisted and perverted. And then maybe by Tuesday night we'll come get to the real exciting good news of how Jesus comes to untwist that desire. Thank you. So it's 6:20 now. If we can be back by 6:30. Thank you.